Good morning. This morning, we're going to talk about a Christmas card from God. The text we're going to use is the entire chapter of Psalms 104. So as usual, everything will be up on the screen. A majority of what I've got to say is going to be up on the screen. So it'll be easier to follow along just in case I get a little carried away and start talking too fast. But I should have plenty of practice with this one because this is actually my third time doing this sermon. I actually did it when I was over at Pearl on the 6th. I did it yesterday when I spoke at one of the nursing homes in Union yesterday. And now I'm doing it again here. So I should have my practice down with this sermon. At least let's hope so. Psalms 104, 1 through 35 says this. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a cloak, stretching out heaven like a tent curtain. He lays his beams of his upper chambers in the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He walks upon the wings of the wind. He makes the winds his messengers, flaming fire his ministers. He establishes the earth upon its foundations so that it will never totter forever and ever. You cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters are standing up above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they hurried away. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place which you established for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass over, so that they will not return to cover the earth. He sends forth springs in the valleys, and they flow between the mountains. They give drink to the beasts of the fields. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Besides them, the birds of the heavens dwell. They lift up their voices among the branches. And he waters the mountains of his upper chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of his works. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and the vegetation for the labor of man, so that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine which makes man's hearts glad, so that he may make his face glisten with oil. And the food sustains the man's heart. The trees of the Lord drink their fill, the cedars of Lebanon which he planted, where the birds build their nests, and the storks whose home is in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats, the cliffs are refuge for the seraphim. He made the moon for the seasons, the sun knows its place of its setting. You appoint darkness, it becomes night. In it all the beasts of the forest prowl about. The young lions roar after their prey and seek their food from God. When the sun rises, they withdraw and lie down in their dens. Man goes forth to his work and his labor until evening. O Lord, how many are your works? In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions. And there is the sea, great and broad, in which are swarms without number. Animals both great and small. There the ships move along, and Leviathan, which you have formed to sport in it. They all wait for you to give them food in due season. You give to them, they gather it up. You open your hand, they are satisfied with good. You hide your face, they are dismayed. You take away their spirit, they expire and return to their dust. You send forth your spirit, they are created. And you renew the face of the ground. Let the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord be glad in his works. He looks at the earth and it trembles. He touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. Let my meditation be pleasing to him. As for me, I shall be glad in the Lord. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. How many of you guys sent out Christmas cards this year? A few of you. That's one thing I don't like. I don't like sending out Christmas cards. I tried that one year, and believe it or not, they're still sitting in my nightstand, still waiting to be gone, still waiting to be sent out. The only thing I still have to do is put the stamps on them, and they were done up probably 4 or 5 years ago. That's not one thing that I really care to do a whole lot. But as a people, we have done a lot of great things. We've sent people to the moon. We've healed many diseases. We've even split atoms. But there's one thing that I cannot believe we have not figured out yet. And that one thing is this: how to put a good flavor on the adhesive on the back of those envelopes that hold them Christmas cards. To those of y'all who have ever licked an envelope, that is the nastiest stuff to ever be put on your tongue. You cannot get that flavor out of your mouth. Hopefully one day we will figure out how to correct that little problem. But anyway, I want to tell a story to start out with. And the story is about an older lady who waited to the last minute to send out her Christmas cards. She knew she had 49 folks on her list, so she rushed into the store and bought a package of 50 without really looking at them. In a big hurry, she addressed all 49 and signed them without reading the message on the inside. Well, on Christmas Day, when things finally had quieted down, she happened to come across the one leftover card and finally read the message that she had sent to 49 of her friends. Much to her dismay, this is what it said. This card is just to say a little gift is on the way. Suddenly she realized that 49 of her friends were expecting a gift from her that they weren't going to get. Well, unlike that unfortunate woman, God has sent us a gift. James 1:17, which already had come up on the screen once and I backed it up, says, every good thing given and every perfect gift from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. Now the text that we read, Psalms 104, describes for us one of the first gifts that God gave to us. And without that gift, none of us would be here today. Without that gift, nothing that we do today would matter. And that gift is this: the gift of creation. Face it, if we weren't created, what would we be doing here? We wouldn't be. So I want to talk about that this morning. And in order to talk about creation, you have to go back to Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. It says, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, God created the world for us. It was given to us to take care of. And speaking of that woman who sent out Christmas cards, she had done so as a message of her love. And that's how David viewed creation. When he wrote Psalms 104, he was marveling at God's gift of creation and how it spoke to him of just how much God cared for him. I want you to picture for a minute David sitting up on the hillside with the sheep. I want you to picture him feeling the wind on his face and watching the trees blow in the wind. Sitting up on the hillside looking down at the Mediterranean, maybe seeing some mountains off in the distance and streams flowing down through the valleys below. In doing so, it strikes him that everything that he sees, somehow a wondrous God that he has, and just how much that God cares for him. Now, people throughout history have asked for evidence of God's existence. And in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, we have that evidence. Romans 1:20 says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. I keep jumping ahead to my next slide. Now, one of the great concerns of people is that they want to feel close to God. They want a sign that he is there and that he cares. How many of y'all read the newspaper? Anybody? How many of y'all read the comic book or the comic section of the newspaper? Nobody. I did when I was a kid. How many of y'all remember an old comic strip called BC? One that took place back in the Stone Age. Well, in one of their comics, there was actually a character that was praying to God, and this is what he prayed. He prayed, send me a sign that you are there. And all of a sudden, a marquee drops out of the sky and says, I'm here. And David understood that was in creation, that God was giving us that very sign. But our problem is that we often don't take time to pay attention. But to those people who do pay attention, they see God in everything that surrounds them. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Werner von Braun said this. Before I go into what he said, I want to tell you a little bit about him, just in one quick brief sentence. Dr. von Braun was the scientist who helped us launch our space program. So he's a fairly intelligent man. But this is what he had to say. One cannot be exposed to law and order of the universe without concluding that there must be a design and purpose behind it all. The better we understand the details of the universe and all that it harbors, the more reason we have found to marvel at the inherent design upon which it was based. Dr. von Braun concluded that this all pointed to a marvelous creator. He said that it was in the law and order of the universe that he saw God's handiwork. Now, you don't have to be a scientist to see or to marvel at the order of creation. Next time you go into the grocery store, especially when it comes time for watermelons to come out, I want you to do something for me. I want you to look at a watermelon. I don't mean just hold it in your hands. I mean actually look at it. The reason why I want you to do this is that each of the watermelon has an even number of stripes on its rind. Every single one of them. If you ever cut an orange, cut it in half, guess what? Each orange has an even number of segments in it. If you ever walk through a field of wheat and pluck one of the stalks and count the number of grains on it, guess what? Each one of the stalks has an even number of grains on it. There is a law and an order to creation. And this law and order is so much so that an astronomer, I always get caught up on that word, by the name of Alan Sandridge, said he was almost a practicing atheist as a boy, but was nagged by the mysteries of answering questions that were not to be found in the glittering array of supernovas. Now, among them was this question: why was there something rather than nothing? So Sandridge began to despair of answering each of the such questions with only reason alone. And so at the age of 50, he willed himself to accept God. In doing so, he had this to say: it was my science that drove me to the conclusion that the world is much more complicated than can be explained by science. It is only through the supernatural that I can understand the mystery of existence. It is only reasonable because of much of what we know as science came into existence because of Christianity. According to an article in the U.S. News and World Report back in 1991, they had this to say. Keep jumping ahead. Said in the West, early science grew out of a decidedly religious impulse, and that impulse was to understand God and his relationship with man. The biblical picture of an orderly creation by a dependable God gave impulse to scientific inquiry. The universe made sense because it was overseen by a supreme intelligence who made mathematical description and prediction possible. Now I want you to look at that last part again. The universe made sense because it was overseen by a supreme intelligence who made mathematical description and prediction possible. Science was made possible because the Bible declared that the world was predictable. The Bible did that. Without the Bible, there wouldn't be any science. Whoops, I just lost my PowerPoint. Johnny, could you get it back up? And fix me on Romans 1:18 through 23. Okay, that'll work. Thank you. It said, now, not everyone wants to read creation the same way that David did. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 23, it says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Now, what Romans is trying to tell us is that there are people who look at creation and deliberately ignore God. Back in 1987, the National Academy of Sciences was arguing against the concept of creationism before the Louisiana Supreme Court. They argued that believing the world came into being by creation fails to display the most basic characteristic of science, and that basic characteristic is reliance upon naturalistic explanations. Many, even in the scientific community, look at creation and refuse to see the Creator, not because he can't be seen, but because they don't want to see him. Now, why would people not want to see God? I think in a part it has to do with people's sin. Sin causes a lot of people to want to hide from God and to deny that he exists. There was a famed psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Carl Menninger. He wrote this: if he could convince patients in psychiatric hospitals that their sins were forgiven, 75% of them could walk out the next day. In a way, many of those people had run away from God, and their sins kept them in a mental prison. Now, in the beginning, when Adam and Eve sinned by taking of the forbidden fruit, what was the first thing that they did when God came around? They hid, didn't they? They tried to run away from God. In Revelations, it describes what it will be like when God comes back again. In Revelation 6:15 through 17, it says, "Then the kings of the earth and the great men and commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?'" There's something about sin that separates us from God, that causes us to flee from the God who David believed loved him. But it's hard to feel the love of God when you're being buried under guilt of sin. And that's why it's interesting that in Psalms 104, that was sung by the Jews during the Day of Atonement. Now, the Day of Atonement was a special holy day for the Jews because it was on that one day of the year that the high priest would make a sacrifice for the sins of all the people. He would enter into the Holy of Holies, into God's presence, and place the blood of the sacrifice on the mercy seat, and the sins of the people would be covered. And when the high priest had fulfilled his task, the sins of the people were forgiven. It was during this holy day that the Israelites could sense the closeness of God with all their hearts. It was during this holy day that the barrier that stood between themselves and God was broken down. And it was during this holy day that the people of God could again sense that God was the God of David described in Psalm 104, a God that was not only there, but a God who cared for them. I want to read for you guys a little story. The story is entitled "Two in a Manger." I love this little illustration. It talks about a missionary group that was sent to Russia to spread the good news. And they were in an orphanage. And this is what one of them had to say. It said it was Christmas time, and they taught the story of Christ's birth, but at the orphanage, everyone listened in amazement. None of the kids or the staff had ever heard it before. One of the missionaries wrote, "We gave the children some materials and instructed them to create a manger scene that they had just heard about. All went well until I got to one table where little Misha sat. He looked to be about 6 years old and had finished his project. As I looked at the little boy's manger, I was startled to see not one, but two babies in the manger. I called a translator to ask him why. Looking at his completed manger scene, the child began to repeat the story accurately until he came to the part where Mary put the baby Jesus in the manger. Then Misha started to ad-lib his own ending. He said, "And when Mary laid the baby in the manger, Jesus looked at me and asked me if I had any place to stay. I told him I have no mama and no papa, so I don't have any place to stay. Then Jesus told me I could stay with him. So I got into the manger, and then Jesus looked at me and told me that I could stay with him forever. Putting his hands over his face, Misha's head dropped to the table, and his shoulders shook as he sobbed and sobbed. He had found someone who would never abandon or nor abuse him, someone who would stay with him forever. And that's why Jesus was sent, to complete God's message of love. Now, someone once told about receiving a Christmas card that had said this, and a lot of you guys are going to recognize this because I've used this illustration before. But if our greatest need had been information, God would have sent us an educator. If our greatest need had been technology, God would have sent us a scientist. If our greatest need had been money, God would have sent us an economist. But since our greatest need was forgiveness, God sent us a Savior. I want to finish out with asking a few questions this morning. Do you feel God's presence here this morning? Do you know the love that he has for you? Do you see God when you walk outside, when you feel the wind blow, when you hear the birds sing, when you see all the life that he has created? It was all done because he loves and he cares for each one of us. He gave the best gift he could in the form of his Son to come to us and teach us about the Father, to be an example of the very nature of the Father, and to ultimately give his life as a sacrifice for our sins, to reconcile Creator and creation together again, to bridge the gap that sin had caused between us and God, and then to conquer death by rising again and ascending once again to the Father. And one day he will come back and gather his children to him for all eternity. And he did this all because he loves us. Now, I'm going to go into a video real quick. Johnny's going to bring it up. The greatest gift as a parent is what? Is your children, isn't it? This video here is a little comical in places, but it's about a preschool group who tells how they understand the Christmas story. Go ahead, Johnny.
Once upon a time, baby Jesus was born. Mary. Mrs. Jesus? Mary. Adam. Mike. Claude. Joseph. I think Elmo. They walked. They had to ride on horses for days. The fairy came down, and then they flied. And then the fairy flied. He got there, and he said, "Do we have a home?" And he said, "That's the only place." And the homekeeper said, "There's no rooms left unless you don't care if you sleep where the sheep and the cows live in." And they tasted it, and it was all stinky. And do you know what kind of animals they had? A cow, lamb, sheep, a horse, 2 donkeys, goats, pigs. And then when Mary was sleeping, she had the baby Jesus. And when the cows awoke, then the baby was born and laying in the manger. And you know what? Jesus turned out to be their own child. Away in the manger, there was no blankets, only this hay. That's all I can sing. A blanket, just clothes, white coat, a gold circle on his head, a hat, and white clothes. There were shepherds watching sheep, and then a bright star in the sky. Stars! Went to them. And other planets? And it was as bright as day. The angel said, follow the star. The star that shines above him is the sign for the only Jesus. A fairy? Yeah, an angel on top of the roof. Noah. Amy goes. The wise men. A blanket. They bought him food, water, and stuff he could play with. A bottle and some toys. Baby food. Rattle. They brought him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jesus. Happy birthday to you.
All I can say from that video is out of the mouth of babes, right? Out of the mouth of babes. Those young people could grasp the basic concept of the Christmas story. They may not get every detail exactly right as we know it as adults, but they do have the concept down. But in order to learn, they have to be taught, and it's up to us to teach them. It's up to us to show them that God is seen everywhere, in creation, everywhere around us, including here in this place right now. We're going to go into our hymn of invitation now, hymn number 410. My faith looks up to thee. We're going to be singing verses 1 and 4.